عادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدرك بؤد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود فطر الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بصخور ميدان أرضه. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose worth cannot be described by speakers, whose bounties cannot be counted by calculators, and whose claim to obedience cannot be satisfied by those who attempt to do so, whom the height of intellectual courage cannot appreciate and the divings of understanding cannot reach. He who whose description no limit has been laid down, no eulogy exists, no time is ordained, no duration is fixed. He brought forth creation through his omnipotence, dispersed winds through his compassion, and made firm the shaking earth with rocks. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Today I wish to speak about an everlasting pandemic, an endemic, something which has plagued many communities and civilizations for decades on end. A lot of times this topic has been swept under the carpet or seen as a dirty secret which must be hidden to outsiders or hidden from other community members. This is, of course, the plague called domestic violence in marriage against both men and women. But my focus today will be on domestic violence against women. So in part one, I want to speak about DV in marriage by focusing on three main subtopics. Number one, how the term sabr or patience has been used to subjugate women in temperamental and volatile marriages. Number two, how the blame game and guilt towards the woman or the wife adds pressure on her to avoid seeking means of leaving such relationships. And number three, the dreaded D word, and how this has almost become haram in the Asian community due to how people may perceive a divorcee as a dishonorable individual. And then for the second part of the khutbah, I would like to discuss the potential solutions to such problems by firstly examining the Quran and how the Quran has defined marriage in Surah Rum and Surah A'raf in two particular verses. And secondly, I want to look at how the word ma'ruf has been used in the Quran to alleviate some of the problems we face in the context of marriage today. And last but not least, how the Prophet, peace be upon him, treated divorcees and how we can learn from him in contemporary society. But before I begin, please can I have a loud and energetic salawat? Asant. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, for my topic, I want to restrict it to two main forms of violence, physical and psychological, and some factors which may exacerbate the use of physical violence in marriages. Some of these factors may be stress from work, being overworked, or even your football team losing. For example, I remember a few years ago, I was reading an article that during the World Cup, spousal abuse and domestic violence increased. For example, if England were losing or they lost, it was taken out on the woman. She was used as a scapegoat for the husband's temper. So she was used as a piñata for the husband to lash out on, just because Harry Kane missed a penalty. And I was thinking, on the one hand, how foolish it is to act in such a manner that there's 11 individuals on a field thousands and thousands of miles away who don't know you from Adam, don't know your name or even that you exist, yet when they lose, we have very real consequences in our own house with spousal abuse and domestic violence and so on. And on the other hand, I saw things like sports and how this actually raises our anger and emotions to such a level where a person thinks it's acceptable to beat his spouse in anger or to be as retribution for his football team. The other form of violence, which is psychological, has many forms: manipulation, fear, intimidation, bullying, coercion, to name a few. And these all lead to making a person feel trapped within a marriage. And in communities close to home, this sort of violence has led to honor killings, sexual abuse, and even slavery. And having spoken to members of the community about this pandemic, and having been asked advice by such people suffering through oppression, I felt that an open discussion about this topic was necessary, especially to not view this topic as a taboo subject, and for the victims to not suffer alone. As for me, many cases have involved Muslim women. This talk shall therefore be restricted to female victims. And this is not to ignore or downplay that men do also suffer domestic abuse. But from my own interactions, I can only speak from the women's point of view, from those who have opened up to me. And there are a number of factors that Muslim women, who are mainly from the South Asian context, and the British Pakistani Muslim, the third generation, they face when it comes to domestic violence in marriage. From the side of the abuser, who may use fear and intimidation as a tactic to control not only the spouse, but the household, including the children. This is used to assert dominance, that I rule the house and it is my way or the highway. This can be by way of financial abuse, restricting the spouse's income, or many times it's just using your physicality as a means of coercion or control. So my first subtopic is patience. So from the side of the woman, in such context, they may feel that they may stay in abusive relationships due to their children, so that their children are not brought up in broken homes. They may bear immense emotional torture for their children and may bear tremendous amounts of pressure and live for the sake of their children and put a smile on for them. So their children do not realize the magnanimity of what is going on. So essentially, at the end of the day, it's the children that do not suffer. This may lead to the woman becoming a prisoner in her own marriage or becoming a prisoner within her own mind, especially if she does not speak to someone about it or does not seek professional help, or that she feels that she does not have any support whatsoever to talk to someone. And I believe that this is the height of loneliness. And when the spouse realizes that the wife is doing this and being patient for the sake of the children, he can use this to his advantage to further control the household. So factor one is patience for the sake of children. And factor two, I have seen that even if women speak to others in the community about their situation, they are told, be patient, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you. And this is a test from God. And what this does, it totally negates the suffering of the woman. And such advice enables further violence to ensue at home. And my second subtopic, the blame game and guilt. I was speaking to a sister from the community who said that she didn't realize how toxic her relationship was until she removed herself from it. And then she realized by removing herself from her situation that actually this is not healthy. But there is a big but here. She thought she would be blamed for everything gone wrong. And this is a big trait of the Asian community, to put all the blame upon the woman. So in such a situation, the woman has now become voiceless due to the mentality of the community. And this has then led to guilt, as the spouse felt that she would be the reason the children would grow up without a father. And that how no one in the family has ever had a divorce, and she would be the first one in her family to have a divorce, and that would put her off. Another factor that may keep women in such abusive relationships is the financial aspect of how can I provide for myself and the children. Because if the children live with the mother, she may not want to burden her parents or siblings to provide for all of them. And my third subtopic is the dreaded D word. The most taboo thing in the Asian community is the dreaded D word, divorce. Many men and women avoid divorce for the mere fact of feeling like they will dishonor their family and that they will be looked down upon in the community. The word izzat or honor is always thrown around when couples feel it is better to separate after having exhausted all the possible solutions, such as counseling, consultation, seeing the local Maulana, and so on and so forth. And for some, even when they obtain a divorce from an abusive marriage, then they have to deal with the comments that get thrown around. Oh, you should have stayed, you should have been patient. And then, if their children are experiencing trauma or are exhibiting behavioral problems, people are quick to say to the mother that this is what happens when the kids are brought up without a father. Hence why when some people see this, they just accept their dire circumstances and stay until they leave this temporary world. In our communities, even thinking about divorce is seen as a big no-no, almost as though someone has committed murder. But once the woman decides to separate from the man, she must be mentally prepared for the sly digs, name-calling, and the fact that she will not be seen in a positive light. And I've even seen the word damaged goods being used to refer to divorcee women. Unfortunately, these problems are just the tip of the iceberg. And some of the mountainous problems faced by women in marriages they feel stuck in. Some feel as though they are enshrouded and encircled by an endless loop of manipulation and intimidation. And psychological violence, unlike physical violence, leads to invisible scars on a person that cannot be seen or felt except by the sufferer. And then the sufferer can choose to conceal these deep wounds and put on a brave face for everyone. But the problem is, the more you try and conceal, the more this trauma will begin to surface, whether that is through nervousness, nail biting, and other behavioral patterns. The body stores this trauma and slowly it manifests itself. Because like a pressurized container, there's only so much a person can bear until an inevitable explosion happens, whether that is self-harm, suicide, or other measures of escape. So just to wrap up part one, I've listed three problems of abusive marriages and the main problems that are associated with them. And in part two, inshallah, we will examine the potential solutions. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, what are the potential solutions we can take from the Quran and Sunnah to address the subtopics of being told to be patient and Allah will reward you? Because truthfully told, there's only so much a person can bear. To begin part two, I want to open up the discussion by defining the concept of marriage in accordance with the following verses in the Quran. Surah Rum, verse 21 states, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So the Quran states here, and one of his signs is that he created for you spouses from amongst yourselves so that you may find comfort in them. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. And he has placed between you Mawadda wa rahma, compassion and mercy. Surely in this are signs for people who reflect. And in another verse, in Surah 7, in Surah Araf 189, it states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَجَعَلَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا لِيَسْكُنَ إِلَيْهَا. The Quran states, He is the one who created you from a single soul, then from it made its spouse, so He may find comfort in her. لِيَسْكُنَ إِلَيْهَا. So in Surah Araf, we see the Quran says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. Allah, or Huwa, has created you from a single soul, and He has made from the soul, a partner or a spouse, in order that He may find sakina, He may find tranquility in her. So now going back to the verse in Surah Rum, we see it uses the word anfus. He created from amongst yourselves. But if we read it in the context of the other verse, we can read it as though He, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has created it from one place, from one locus. Call it humanity, call it the soul, call it human, or whatever. Humanity in this verse is united. From the one soul, then we move on to the word anfus in the other verse, that Allah has created amongst the souls, amongst the humans, lakum, for you all, azwaj, a partner. Why? Li, so that taskunu ilayha, so that you may find comfort in your partner. Wa ja'al, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done ja'al, He has created bainakum, between you all, muwadda, reciprocal love, and rahma, which is a godly attribute. Allah has praised rahma in this partnership or marriage. And rahma is a word that you cannot truly translate in the English language, because it encompasses mercy, compassion, understanding, kindness, sympathy, empathy. And I've even seen the word tenderness used to describe rahma. So from this unified place, from this one locus, from this nafsun wahida, from the place of one, we also see it gives rise to the many, to the anfus, to the souls. It shows me today that humans are one in humanity. They're united in humanity, but are distinct from one another. However, they need partners, and it shows that humans are social and ethical creatures that need other people to interact with. So the Quranic conception of marriage is an institution that, quote unquote, should facilitate rahmah, mawadda, and sakina. Therefore, if I expand on this, if people are looking to get married, one should cultivate these values and internalize and habitualize these godly characteristics of mercy, of compassion, understanding, kindness, sympathy, empathy, and tenderness. You need to understand the other, open up to the other, being vulnerable, and so on and so forth. And quite frankly, if a person has not worked on themselves and not reflected and built upon these characteristics, or built these characteristics, then they are not ready for marriage. They're not ready to be a partner for someone else. Because if there's no compromise or understanding, marriage will not be a place of tranquility. In fact, it will become the opposite. And in regard to the blame game and guilt and feeling utterly isolated, I can use one of my most favorite verses in the Quran from Surah Duha, where it states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wadda'aka rabbuka wa ma qala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells His Prophet, your Lord has not abandoned you, nor does He hate you, nor has He become hateful of you. That today never feel like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has abandoned you, no matter how isolated and lonely you feel, and that He will always be by your side. So this in turn should encourage people to speak out if they're suffering in such marriages, showing both men and women that yes, this does go on and it may be rampant in our communities. However, if more people speak about these things, it may help others to speak out and seek help. It can be a means of empowerment. Yes, that you do have a voice, and yes, your voice can be heard. And if people do this, and we hold workshops and speak about this in our communities on the manabir, and it will break the notion that domestic violence is a taboo subject, that is the elephant. No, actually it's not even the elephant, it's the bloody equator or the asteroid in the atmosphere. So doing these things like workshops and speaking about these problems may potentially may potentially eradicate this problem of the blame game and the subsequent guilt a person may feel when trying to speak out or leave such a marriage. So now, just on the final part, in relation to divorce and treatment of women in marriage, we start with the Quran, which uses this word, very interesting word, ma'ruf, in the following three verses. In Surah Nisa, verse 19, it says, "O believers, it's not possible for you to inherit women against their will or mistreat them. You must treat them bil ma'ruf, in an honorable manner, ila akhirihi." And in Surah Baqarah, verse 2 to 8, it states, "Women or wives have similar right of those of men equitably, or bil ma'ruf, in accordance with honorable norms." And the following verse in Surah Baqarah, verse 2 to 9, it says, "The divorce shall be lawful only twice. Then you, the husband, should either keep the wife on reasonable terms or release her bil ma'ruf, with kindness." According to scholars such as Professor Syed Damad, the word ma'ruf used here linguistically can denote many different meanings, and therefore God has left it to human wisdom to translate bil ma'ruf in a matter they see fit or in accordance with their respective contexts. But the underlying message here is that women must be treated bil ma'ruf, whether that is kindly, reasonably, or equitably. And if the dreaded D word is brought into the equation, then this should be carried out bil ma'ruf. As the Quran says, if you cannot live with her on reasonable terms, then release her with kindness. And in terms of separation or divorce, which for many years is viewed as something ugly and distasteful, and thus this makes divorcee women portrayed in a negative light. This should show that women, they have value because she is a human. Simple, khalas, end of story. And that this label of damaged goods is not a befitting label for a human, just because a person is a divorcee. And if we brought the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam into the 21st century, then we can dispel this myth that divorced women are damaged goods and that they should be avoided and looked down upon. There is no shame or dishonor of being divorced, if that is the last resort a person has resorted to. In fact, it is a very courageous and brave decision. There's no shame or dishonor in waiting a period of time, however long it may be, before thinking of getting remarried. And we should learn from the Prophet, if he married divorcees, that it shouldn't put us off. We shouldn't attach this label of divorce goods onto these sort of relationships. And there's no dishonor or shame being a divorcee, because the label does not define a person. However, not marrying someone solely based on the fact that person X or person Y, both men and women, are divorced, is something that needs to change. What matters is treating a human as a human. And we've heard this many times in a reported tradition, that the honor of a Muslim is more sanctified in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the Kaaba itself. And as Mother's Day is coming up soon, I leave you and I leave myself a beautiful thing my teacher once told me. And I know he wants to keep himself anonymous, so I'll hold myself to that. He said to me a few years ago that the biggest blessing a father can do is love the mother of his children. And I would add to that sentiment, not just love her for the sake of being a mother, but love her in philosophical terms as a human qua human. Insan bima huwa insan. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. All praise is due to the Lord of the worlds, the most beautiful and the most merciful, who made mercy incumbent upon himself. He is the creator for whom our praises can never ever be sufficient, for whom our thanks and gratitude can never be enough. He is that Lord whose blessings can never be enumerated. He is worthy of thanks at every instance and praise at every moment for every single blessing. Blessings that do not cease, they are never ending, as He is ever present. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات وآخر دعواهم أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. صلوات.